Hello, I'm Michael. Welcome to Oxford Online English. In this lesson, you'll learn about part 1 of the Cambridge PET Speaking Exam. Do you know the basic information about the speaking exam and how it works? Do you know how to act in the exam? Do you know how to impress the examiners? In this video, you'll see the answers to these questions. You could also see some advice on how to get a higher score in part 1 of the PET speaking test. Let's start with some basic information. In part 1 of the speaking test, you'll be with a partner, but you won't talk to them. You speak only to the examiner. This part lasts between 2 and 3 minutes. Now, let's look at the questions you could be asked and how to answer them. The main topics the examiner could ask you about are hometown, family and home, work or study, leisure, and future plans. The examiner will ask you questions on 2 or 3 of these topics. Before we talk about these topics, let's start at the beginning. The examiner will ask you, "What's your name?" Now remember to speak in full sentences. When the examiner asks you for your name, don't just say, "Michael." Say, "My name is Michael." This shows that you know how to make simple sentences. When asked for your surname, do the same. Don't just say Jones, say, "My surname is Jones." After you have given your surname, the examiner will ask you to spell it. Practice, practice, and practice some more spelling your surname. You might think this is easy, but a lot of students confuse letters on the exam day. The examiner will usually ask where you are from. Remember to speak in full sentences and try and add extra information. You want to show the examiners that you can add details to your answers. So when the examiner asks, "Where are you from?" don't just say, "I'm from London." Give more information about your town or city. Say, "I'm from London, the capital of the UK, which is in the south of my country." Or, "I'm from Seville, a beautiful town in the province of Andalusia." This shows that you're a confident English speaker who can form sentences and give extra information. The examiners might ask you to talk in more detail about your town. Remember to speak clearly and confidently. You want the examiners to be able to hear and understand you. If the examiner asks you to tell them something interesting about your town, don't start muttering, "My town is interesting because it has lots of museums and parks." Be clear. Be confident. "My town is interesting because it has lots of fantastic museums and beautiful parks." This sounds better and easier to understand, right? Also, remember to try and sound natural. You don't want to sound like a robot who has memorized all the answers. You should sound like you're talking to a friend. In PET, the examiners want to see that you can communicate naturally. Listen to the difference between these 2 answers to the question, "What is the most interesting part of your town?" The most interesting part of my town is the zoo because you can see lots of different animals, such as lions, elephants, and zebras. Lots of people like visiting the zoo. Now, let's compare this with a more natural way to answer this question. The most interesting part of my town is the zoo because you can see lots of different animals, such as lions, elephants, and zebras. Lots of people like visiting the zoo. The second answer sounds a lot more natural. Try not to sound like a robot when answering. Use intonation. Maybe you didn't hear the examiner or didn't understand the question. What should you do? Ask them politely to repeat the question. Don't try and answer the question if you aren't sure what you are answering. Maybe they asked you where you are from. You don't want to say, "I love playing basketball. It's my favorite sport." it's better to ask the examiner to repeat the question. Say, "I'm sorry, could you repeat that please?" Or, "Can you say that again please?" Don't worry about having to ask this. It's normal and it won't affect your score. Just make sure that you're polite. On the topic of family and home, you might be asked to talk more about your family and where you live. Remember to use adjectives to show off your abilities. If they ask you to describe where you live, don't just say, "I live in a flat which has 3 bedrooms." Use some adjectives. Show off. Give them more information. Say, "I live in a gorgeous flat in the city centre which has 3 bedrooms. There's also a huge living room and a tiny kitchen." Can you see the difference? Which sounded better? The second one, right? Using the adjectives gorgeous, huge, and tiny makes this answer more detailed and interesting. If you are asked to tell them about your family, don't just say, "I have a brother and a sister." Use some adjectives. Say, "I have an older brother and a younger sister." By using just these 2 adjectives, your answer sounds better. If you want to get even higher marks, try to use different adjectives and not just the regular boring ones. We can all use good, interesting, nice, or boring, but you should try and use some different adjectives like excellent, fascinating, wonderful, or dull. The examiner asks, which do you think is better, living in the countryside or in the city? Let's compare 2 answers. I think living in the countryside is a good choice. I find nature very interesting and the views are nice. The only negative is that it is sometimes boring. This is a good answer. Now, let's change the adjectives. I think living in the countryside is an excellent choice. I find nature fascinating and the views are wonderful. The only negative is that it is sometimes dull. This sounds much better, right? Using the adjectives excellent, fascinating, wonderful, and dull makes the answer more interesting and shows that you have a higher level of English. Next, let's look at using verb forms correctly. It's a good idea to show that you can use different verb forms. This will show the examiner your grammatical knowledge. On the topic of leisure, you will have to talk about your hobbies, what you enjoy doing, what sports you do, what music or films you like, and so on. This is the perfect opportunity to show that you can use different verb forms. If the examiner asks what kind of sport you like doing, don't just use the present tense. Don't just say, "I like tennis. Tennis is my favorite sport." You could say, "I like playing tennis. In the past, I loved football, but today I prefer tennis. Next weekend, I'm going to play it with my friend." Using a range of past, present, and future verb forms shows your ability to use English grammar to express different ideas. Maybe they will ask about what music you enjoy listening to. Don't just say, "I like pop music. I listen to it every day." This is a good answer, but you want to give more information and use different verb forms. Say, "I used to like dance music, but at the moment I like listening to pop music. I love listening to it every day. This summer, I am going to a concert to listen to my favorite band." This sounds much better, right? On the topic of future plans, you may be asked to talk about what you want to do in the future or how English will help you in the future. My next piece of advice is to make your answers interesting. You don't want to sound boring. Remember that the information you give doesn't have to be true. In general, you should try and give an honest answer because it will sound more natural. But if you can't think of anything to talk about, you can invent an answer. Imagine that the examiner asks, "What do you want to be in the future?" but you don't know what you want to be in the future. What can you do? You could invent an idea to make your answer more interesting. Don't say, I don't know what I want to be in the future. Say, I'm not sure what I want to do, but I'm considering becoming a scientist because I think science is fascinating. This is a much more interesting answer. Of course, you don't get a higher score for being more interesting, but making your answers interesting will make you use a wider range of language. You'll naturally add more details and use more of your English, and this will help your score. Maybe you'll be asked about whether you enjoy studying English. Don't just say, I like studying English because I like languages. Try to make it more interesting. Say, I like studying English because I think it will help me in the future, and I really enjoy listening to English music, and it helps me understand my favorite songs. This is a better answer. It's longer, more detailed, and it uses a wider range of language. In conclusion, in part 1 of your PET speaking exam, you should speak in full sentences. Try to add extra information. Speak clearly and confidently. Try to sound natural. Ask the examiner to repeat the question if you don't understand something. Use a range of adjectives and verb forms in your answers. Make your answers interesting. Now that you've seen some sample questions and have listened to some advice on how to do part 1 of the Cambridge PET speaking exam, my final advice would be to practice, practice, and practice some more. Try to use some of the ideas we've looked at in this lesson. Thanks very much for watching. I hope that you have found this advice on how to do part 1 of the Cambridge PET exam useful. You can see more of our free lessons on our website, oxfordonlineenglish.com. See you next time.